Obviously, from an agenda perspective, when we're looking at what we need to do in order to really drive the maximum output or efficiency for a business that wants to tackle asset management, we obviously want to establish some groundwork here as we go through this, right? So first and foremost, what I want to talk about really is what is fleet or asset management from our perspective, right? Because there's lots of different systems that have been out there in the past, such as facilities management applications that allow for you to do some of these tasks. But how is it different in the Microsoft world, and why are there different solutions that are out there as well for it? So we're going to dig in a little bit more onto what that asset or fleet management is. And moving forward here, I'm actually going to just basically shorten this and say asset management, because fleet management, when it comes to assets, is very similar, except we're just dealing typically with cars or trucks or trailers or even tractors for that matter. The net result is that we're managing assets as we go through that process. Now, what we want to do is we want to convey some of the challenges that we've heard in the industries that we service. We service agriculture, manufacturing, distribution, and professional service-based environments. And so we've got a lot of experience when it comes to different types of assets and classifications of assets. So we want to go through those challenges, and maybe they'll resonate with you, or maybe you've got different ones that we need to address. But the net result is that these challenges help us align then the right type of solution for your organization. We want to talk more specifically then about those solutions. We're a software vendor, so we should probably show some software here as well, right? Which means we should take those solutions and compare and contrast them for you. One of the unique aspects of the Stoneridge software organization really is the fact that we lead around the business process need before the software need. It used to be back in the day that all partners would lead with their software that they love the most. Well, now we really focus on understanding the business process need, and from there align the software. So let's show some of those different types of perspectives that we have seen and even implemented that may help you. And ideally here, bring you to that next level, which is how can we help you really determine the right solution to implement, and what steps should you go through to really get to that end state or end goal that you're really shooting for as you go through this process. So first and foremost, let's jump into what is fleet management and asset management within the Microsoft Dynamics purview or lens as we go through this. So first and foremost, asset management is pretty much part of the base capability here, right? We have assets, we need to manage those. And what I mean by management of those is that we have to have different types of assets or classes of assets that we need to track. We need to understand, for example, different types of attributes that are related to those assets. For a transmission, for example, you're going to have identification numbers on a transmission or an engine. Whereas with extruders, you may want to have extrusion variables, such as how much product or material can actually be extruded safely then from that extruder. All of those different types of attributes and serial numbers and identifying aspects make it easier for you to basically understand what your assets are composed of, and ideally then track some of those attributes for informational or even reporting purposes that you may have inside of your environment. Obviously, from an asset management perspective, what we want to do is we want to transition from this break-fix type mentality inside of an organization to something that is more akin to preventative maintenance, right? How do we execute and set up these types of maintenance tasks? How do we relate those to the right types of resources, as you can see from the alignment perspective here, to make sure then that we're involving the right resources at the right time with the right workload, so that we can basically manage and prevent any type of asset conditions that could create downtime events or an out-of-service based event inside of your environment. The other aspect that we really want to track as well, especially from a managerial perspective, is the budget versus actual requirements that you may have inside of your organization. And then finally, from an asset management perspective, I've generalize this because it is obviously a very critical component then of how you do your asset management. We want to collect the data so that we can make better or informed decisions on different types of staffing, on different types of assets that we should be purchasing. For example, if we have history of a particular brand of asset that has many failures compared to a similar brand, well, maybe we want to use that other brand because we have less issues with that, or maybe we have better service level agreements, or maybe we have better turnaround times in terms of what that maintenance is, or even maybe it's cheaper to maintain those assets as well, right? So when we think about asset management, it is a very holistic perspective here that goes beyond even some of these basics, but at a high level, you're tracking assets. You're making sure you understand where they're at. You're understanding when you need to do maintenance. You're understanding the cost of that maintenance. And finally, you're doing the alignment, obviously, of resources, of purchases, and spare parts to really drive that inside of your environment. Now, asset management has a couple of other terms that are pretty commonly used as well, and you may be more akin to these or familiar with these. An example would be a CMMS system, a computerized maintenance and management system, is really the same thing as asset management in this conversation. There's also the computer-aided facility management, or CAFM, along with the enterprise asset management. These really mean the same thing. So when you hear these different terms as we go through this presentation, or even in the market, there's a lot of similarities with these acronyms then obviously that relate to basically the same thing, which is really managing our assets inside of our organization. Now, beyond the common acronyms, some of the really big challenges that many different industries face when it comes to asset management revolve around a couple of different topics. You know, the first that I typically see, obviously, are really tracking of what assets are really owned inside of your environment. Now, this is obviously scaled in many different ways, right? Meaning, where is the asset at? If we have multiple facilities, for example, and let's just pick on extruder systems as just a base example of an asset that may have many different components, and extruders can be fairly large as well, but we need to know, as for example, as a maintenance tech gets involved with this process, where we need to go to be able to basically service that given asset, right? So we want to basically track what we own, what we may or may not own, what may be installed at customer sites for that matter as well, and basically where we need to go to be able to then service those given assets. You'd be amazed at how many organizations use fixed assets to be able to tackle this requirement, but the generality around this is that fixed assets don't always relate to a maintainable asset, because if you think about it, you may have assets that you maintain that are no longer fixed assets because they're no longer being depreciated, right? So this is a really important perspective here that's commonly used inside of any asset management solution. We need to know where they're installed, for example. We need to understand what we're doing from a preventative maintenance schedule then for that given asset. An example would be generators. We want to have a monthly preventative maintenance schedule that we check a generator to make sure it's working okay. So that way, when it comes time to potentially use that said generator, we know that it's in good condition and working or operating condition to be able to basically then use that given asset in that situation. We want to record the financial aspects as well of this, right? So from an asset perspective, we want to know what the depreciation is on that asset. If we have a truck, for example, and we replace the bed on that truck with a different bed on an F350 or 450 or above, we want to know exactly what that cost is, or acquisition, or on top of the existing cost, what has happened there as well. So those financial perspectives are really important as well from an asset management perspective. We also want to have really good workflow in place when it comes to end user break fix requests that may go beyond, for example, those preventative maintenance events. And the reason for this is that a lot of systems allow for end users to make work orders, and work orders are where maintenance techs and the management processes, and that may not be the right place for those requests basically to come, because you may want to have some type of screening process around them right before you actually release them as a work order. The other aspect of this, obviously, is in today's age, we want to basically use as much mobility as we possibly can in order to really then ensure that we're recording all of the right information then when it comes to basically identifying, obviously, those needs for end users as we go through that process, right? The other aspects of here as well beyond mobility are going to be, for example, spare parts management. We want to make sure we've got the minimum quantity then to be able to repair some of these given assets, along with the resources that are needed to then do the repairs and the automation that we may need, for example, to get statistical information then from these assets, as opposed to having somebody type in odometer information. Maybe you have some type of system where you can provide then odometer information directly into the Microsoft solutions. Well, this automation is another important perspective because, as we all know, in the maintenance area, we're getting leaner and leaner, it feels like sometimes, to be able to address a lot of these business needs. How can we make this easier and faster for your teams to really move forward with that? So when we talk about those challenges, obviously there are others as well. And we're not even talking yet about like AI enablement or predictive maintenance that are features that are even above and beyond some of these challenges, because quite candidly, those are newer features that you can grow into longer term here versus the base or table stake based capabilities here. These are really common as issues or pain points that we help address as we go through the implementation of these Microsoft solutions to really then support your business. So the question that comes out typically as we start talking about this and as people start researching what can we do with the Microsoft solutions to really address these needs, it becomes kind of confusing, to be honest, for a lot of different individuals because they don't live and breathe, for example, Microsoft tools all the time. It'd be really cavalier for me to say to you, hey, we have something that we can solve all the time, every time with one solution. We have a lot of different solutions that we use then to be able to address these needs based upon many different factors. But we can generalize these inside of this conversation, obviously, for today so that you can understand a little bit more as to what we can do from the dynamics perspective as we go through this process. So first and foremost, we can use, for example, Dynamics 365, the finance and operations platform. We can use both the fixed asset capability and an enterprise asset management capabilities to really address those pain points or challenges inside of your environment. If you have Business Central, or what we call Dynamics 365 Business Central, we can use the fixed assets inside of that system along with then third-party products such as the Asset Guardian to really drive some of the best practices that are used then to address those challenges. We can even use, for example, Dynamics 365 Field Service to be able to really address then some of these maintenance needs that you may have if you don't have, for example, either the finance and operations or Business Central ERP platforms. Maybe you've got a CRM platform with Dynamics 365 Sales. Well, Field Service might be a better product for you to implement because it may align to your technology direction inside of your organization. And finally, I just want to make a note here. We're not going to cover it in plethora or in detail today, but the Power Platform is another option where you can build your own asset management-based capabilities without having to then purchase different licenses from a Dynamics perspective or a third-party license. For example, maybe your asset management is as simple as just having an asset table where you can track from a text perspective what assets you have and where they're installed, but you don't need work orders, you don't need the financial integration. Well, the Power Platform, you can build lists and things of that nature and build apps that then allow you to keep track of that information without having to go super deep, for example, with F&O, Business Central, or Field Service. So this is typically what you're going to look at when we look at the Microsoft solutions. Now, I know what you're all thinking, because I always think it as well. Why do we have so many different options? Well, candidly, there are different solutions for different scales that we have here that really help customers align budget, scope, and really the people and process and technology perspective with their end goal. So as an example, different business systems that we saw there before really support different market needs. For example, the F&O product is typically more of a mid-market to enterprise product. And on the BC side, we look at that as something that's more of the small and medium business all the way up to enterprise, right? But it's geared towards a different type of user or environment as we go through that. So that's something to note. And I want to just stress to you that you can't generalize this. You need to talk to a partner typically to dig a little bit deeper to understand what those differences are and what really aligns, because I can guarantee it's not going to be just asset management that typically drives the selection process inside of your organization. You're going to want to know about purchasing, about warehouse management capabilities, right? So we want to talk through that to really scale it correctly. Obviously, we've got different customers that come from different business needs as well, right? Where they're going to basically maybe have Business Central and they don't want to implement F&O's EAM capabilities to get that. Instead, they want to use Business Central because they want to then have it richly integrated from a financial perspective inside of the system, right? So this helps you really understand a little bit more as to why these solutions exist. We allow you basically to scale to identify the segregation of those job responsibilities and how many assets you need to manage. And then from there, what we do is we really focus on the business process need to align the right technology to really drive forward then what you want to use to address those business needs. So that's why we have the solutions that are out there and why we maintain them. And that's a really good thing from your perspective, because what it does do is it allows you really then to implement a much more pointed or tailored solution to your environment that supports those workload needs. Now, let's jump into some of the capabilities and of each of those different offerings that we have, because I will say there are differences between them, right? And these differences are going to be something that you're going to want to think around, obviously, as you go through your selection process. Now, on the finance and operations side, so on the big enterprise side of this, when we talk about asset management, we typically talk about what we call enterprise asset management. And in enterprise asset management, we're maintaining, for example, both maintenance and fixed assets inside of the environment. We're trying to track the financial impact from acquisitions and depreciation to capitalization, and then even to purchasing, right, for spare parts, and then also for break, fix, work order requisitions that we may need. We're really trying to align downtime alignment, because these assets, for example, may be used from a manufacturing perspective inside of finance and operations. And from there, we want to basically schedule downtime that may impact our MPS calculations, for example, inside of the environment. We want to know where assets are located. We want to set up different types of preventative maintenance schedules. As you can see here, I won't go through each of these, but the net result is that there's a lot that we need to be able to track then inside of finance and operations to really make sure that we're addressing those business needs inside of the environment. This is a slice of a lot of those different capabilities that are provided inside of asset management. But please note, this goes even further. Beyond mobility, beyond asset reporting, you may have, for example, AI-based requirements that are starting to come in, where you have agents or bots that are looking at all these different types of maintenance requests and are escalating or elevating those requests based upon an impact to production for downtime. Did you know that you can now use, for example, large language models to basically do what a human would do, which is I'm going to go look at that resource, I'm going to see what production has been scheduled, and I want to know what the downstream impact is if I actually schedule this work order for maintenance. Well, we have the capabilities now to basically almost have a person, so to speak, using these AI capabilities to really look at that information and help drive feedback then to the end user as to what's going to happen if there is an issue, for example, with that based upon what the output is of that given agent. Now with this though, let's start more basic and let's show, for example, some of the capabilities then inside of the finance and operations product that really then helps you align some of those capabilities. So I'm going to flip my screen just really quickly here. And here we should see, for example, the finance and operations environment. So inside of F&O, if I click on my menu here and I expand this out and I go into my modules, there's a full asset management module here that has a lot of great functionality inside of it. And just to kind of highlight this, if I expand it all, you can see that we have all of these different areas that we can use to basically manage assets. We can identify, for example, all the different assets that we have. So as an example here, if I go into my asset view inside of here, I should be able to see then my plastics organization, for example, the different locations of those given assets. For example, on my extrusion lines inside of here, as I expand this out, we can see, for example, on extrusion line 1, that we have some assets and locations that are inside of here, and we even have parent and child assets that we can actually highlight then inside of here as we interact with this. So as you can see, it's providing a very visual view of how we actually step through, as you can imagine, then the asset, where it's installed at, whether or not it has child assets. For example, an extruder has a blender, a DC drive, a DC motor, a gearbox that are all related then to that given asset. So these are kind of table stake perspectives that we look at, but they provide a really good and easy view then for you to really then maintain where those assets are and where they're installed inside of the environment. Now, the functionality goes way beyond that, right? So we've got requests, we've got work orders, we've got schedules. I'm not going to bore you with all that, because what I'd love to do is do a more tailored demo for you on those capabilities. But what I do want to highlight here really revolves around the fact that if you look at, for example, maintenance request management in the workspace inside of Dynamics, and when you click on the analytics that are inside of here, you get a lot of great information and even integration into other Microsoft products that makes it easier to understand, for example, where your requests are coming from and what type of requests are being tackled then inside of your environment. So as an example here, I see that most of the actual assets that go through this asset process of going from a request from an end user to then scheduling from a work order typically require mechanics then to be able to do those given repairs. And if I click on that particular topic, what we should see as well is what are those assets, for example, even now, that are undergoing that actual maintenance activity inside of here. We can, for example, go even further with this, that we actually have insights that are actually being shared here as well that say, for example, what is the most required trade skill without then, for example, using the charts and graphs to get to it. We have summary information that comes into here. And the really great thing about this is the fact that you can actually go through and then edit these analytics to add your own perspectives and views to these. So that way you can align really with the business needs without having to create customizations to be able to tackle those given requirements. Other areas that I just want to kind of highlight here as well, from a maintenance request perspective, maintenance requests are something that typically end users do, right? So one of the great capabilities that we have as well, if I actually go just really quickly and show this, is the fact that we can also then use asset or mobility to really drive this as well, right? So as an example here, I have the asset management application installed on my phone here. And from my phone, for example, I could do a maintenance request inside of here. So I'm an end user, as an example, that a forklift that just broke down is, dumping fluid of some type all over the ground. I need somebody to come out here and take a look at that. Well, what I can do is I can actually go ahead and click, for example, the creation of a new maintenance request. I can say, for example, if I connect just really quickly here again, it looks like it disconnected. As I will say to anyone in this industry, it is not a demo until something goes wrong, and hopefully that's the only thing we have wrong that goes throughout this demonstration. But what I can do is I can align, for example, the type of maintenance request. I can say the forklift is spewing fluid, right? as part of this. So we've got a bad problem here. And what I can also do then is search then for that asset and then add it to this request. So that way, if I had, for example, a QR code or something on that asset, I could actually just scan that as part of that operation. And then finally, what I can do here is I can obviously establish the criticality then related to this, or the service level on it. I've done this as a critical perspective. And when I click on done for that, what's going to happen is this is actually going to go through and then create that maintenance request then inside of finance and operations for you to interact with. And you can do more than just maintenance requests, right? So if you are a maintenance tech, you may want to work on your maintenance order from here and enter in that information in terms of what you've consumed or how many hours you've worked on that given work order, because those costs also need to be captured. It's just a lot of great capability that's inside of here to be able to then drive that. And then finally, if we then go through and look at, for example, then our maintenance requests, you can see here that that one came through, and I can now access that information and then drill down even further to really get more information then about that particular maintenance request, and even then use more of a workflow with it to then generate, for example, a work order, because as a maintenance manager, I don't want end users creating maintenance work orders. I want them creating requests that I then use as part of a workflow process to basically then generate different work orders inside of the system that I then schedule as part of that process. So these are just some insights then. And one other area that I just want to show you, there's just so many great features here. I can't show them all in such a short amount of time. But for example, on work orders here as well, what I could look at would be, for example, the analytics. So if you're a manager of these particular work orders and it goes beyond then the maintenance requests, and I want to understand, for example, the different types of work orders, the different types of repaired assets that are most common, the different types of work order details that are inside of here as well, and what has been unplanned, for example, that's not considered what we would classify as preventative maintenance. There's just a lot of goodness here, obviously, that you can use then to really get to those analytics even further. And the reason I highlight the analytics, obviously, in this conversation is because truly this is the output of typically what maintenance managers and teams want. They want to understand where their assets are, which ones need to be worked on, and obviously what they need to do better to be able to reduce that cost or reduce that downtime as they go through those different types of operations. So the finance and operations based capabilities inside of here, there's a bunch of them, right, that really drive that and provide a lot of flexibility for you then from that perspective to really then manage those assets. Now, if we keep moving along here, obviously I want to give some time as well to some of the other solutions that we have inside of the Microsoft stack that really then support some of these asset management capabilities. So first and foremost, just to kind of recap then what happens here on the finance and operations side, who would really use, for example, the F&O based capabilities? Well, really, it would be first off existing customers that are on the finance and operations platform. If you already have F&O, well, all you got to do is add the EAM capabilities, and boom, you're able to then use that integrated EAM based capability where you can generate purchase orders, track costs, capitalize things, you name it, all inside of one business system. The other perspective here would be new customers that are looking at the F&O platform. This would then cover you as well, because as part of your implementation process, obviously, you could look at EAM as one of those base capabilities that you want to implement. And the strengths that I just want to highlight here that are a little bit different than compared to, for example, maybe the Business Central and field service perspectives really are the strengths around a much tighter integration or coupling with what we call projects. So you can do project-based work and capitalization processes inside of the environment. You have a deeper integration with downtime in terms of when we run MRP and MPS, we can basically then say, for example, that if we have a resource that's related, that is really an asset that has downtime scheduled on it, well, we want to take the work on that machine potentially or resource resource and then reuse or use a different resource to address that. Well, on the F&O side, we have native integration with that. We also then have the ability to do even more advanced what we call warehouse management or transportation management integration for larger assets, for example, that may need to be shipped, or parts. As an example with that, a lot of these generator systems have very large systems inside of them that typically require some type of LTL or FTL scheduling to be able to then even replace that given product, for example. Well, we need to have more advanced transportation and warehouse processes in place to be able to drive that. And then finally, the first party capability, meaning that Microsoft directly supports the EAM capabilities, are embedded inside of F&O. And this can be a pro and a con, to be quite candid with you, but a lot of people really love the first party capabilities that are inside of here then to be able to drive that. Now, when we start talking about Business Central now, really what does Business Central provide from an asset management perspective here as well? And what I want to do is just kind of demystify it, because a lot of people are like, well, hey, Business Central doesn't do exactly what F&O does. Well, you're right, but I will tell you, as part of Stone Ridge, we have looked to find really the best asset management-based capability solutions that are out there, and we feel we have one with one of the third-party apps that we use to really support our customers. So if you compare this slide really to the F&O slide, we pretty much have all the same base capabilities then that we can use then from a BC perspective. We have fixed asset and maintenance asset based capabilities where we can then have fixed assets that do depreciation and the acquisition and the capitalization and the purchasing, but then we also then have the ability to set up maintenance assets by using the third-party solution that we recommend, which is the asset group capability, right, as part of that. So the other aspect of this as well is the fact that we support where those assets are located, the preventative maintenance, the spare parts, the IoT, the mobility, even portals, for example, are also supported with the Business Central solution from an asset management perspective. So like I said, let's take a look at this as well from a BC perspective so you can understand a little bit more of what those capabilities are as we go through, obviously, this demonstration. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to flip my screen one more time as well, and what we should see is the Asset Guardian workspace that we have inside of Business Central. One of the things I just want to highlight here is that when we talk about third-party apps and a lot of software solutions, they're a totally different culture or totally different application, whereas when we look at the Dynamics 365 applications, they're natively embedded inside of the Business Central solution. So it feels like a first-party app, but it's maintained really as a third-party solution. Now, what we can do here, though, is, as you can see, if I, for example, expand this out and look at more roles that are inside of here, as an example, I can have fixed assets that are inside of here. So when it comes to you basically acquiring and buying different types of products that you may then want to depreciate, well, you can do that inside of Business Central. So we have our forklift here, for example, that we acquired for $24,000 or $25,000. And if I look at that book value to drill down into it, we can also see then that we have a depreciation that's occurring against this. That is the financial perspective that maybe you as an asset team need to track, that you're then using for some type of decision making, right? There's going to be lifetime value, right? Total lifetime value that you're going to want to calculate. And so what's nice about this is that having the fixed asset and the maintenance assets inside of one system allows for you to really get to that detail very quickly inside of the system. Now, you can do even more things with this. Like, for example, you can analyze the different data and group it together by different types of data elements. For example, the total amount and what's been posted to the general ledger. It's almost like having a pivot table inside of Business Central to do more advanced analysis, so you can, for example, identify identify different fixed asset numbers and the amount, for example, of value that is there. And then maybe, for example, the count of the different types of entries that are inside of here, right? That you may also want to have where you can drag and drop or put those in there to be able to really then understand what those values are going to be. So some more advanced analysis too that you can use from a fixed asset and also from a maintenance asset perspective as well inside of Business Central. And it doesn't stop just at the fixed assets. I just wanted to highlight that because we didn't show it obviously in F&O, same great capability there. But also, for example, we may want to do very similar processes, right? So as an example, I may want to do, for example, a request for work that needs to be done, right? So this is that break fix scenario. And maybe, for example, I want to create a guided request where the system pops up and says, okay, the forklift is spewing fluid, right, as part of this, right? And what I want to do then as well is align then what is that equipment that's out there. I could say it's forklift 02 that I scan for it. And from here, actually it's a generator for this one, so we'll actually flip that to forklift 01. There we go. But basically what we can do then is we can do a very similar process to what I showed before, which is we can basically take these given requests and then create requests that allow us then to go through and then escalate these to the next step. So just as an example here, on this given request, if I actually open it up, we can see, for example, that a work order has been generated off of it. And from that work order, what I can now do is I can then enter in additional details about it. I can capture a customer signature or a signature maybe of the, not just a customer, but, you know, from a maintenance perspective, your customer may be a department lead and you want to get a sign off saying that the machine is now good to go and they know about that. You may want to attach, for example, different types of documents to this. You may want to come down here, for example, from the line perspective and then generate, for example, different types of equipment needs that you may need that you're going to then post. Or maybe even, for example, you're going to be taking meter information, for example, odometer information, to capture that, to be able to then make sure then that if you have preventative maintenance that's based upon when you hit a certain odometer threshold, well, it's going to then schedule, for example, your 75,000 or 100,000 mile checkup as you go through that, right? So a lot of the same great capabilities that you saw in F&O are also available then inside of the Business Central solution. And as you can see here, very pointed then for you to then interact with those requests, those work orders, and move forward very similarly when it comes to insights and Power BI. Well, obviously, we can use these insights then to really drive some of those different questions that you may have, such as the average time worked on a particular work order. Well, we'll see those as you populate that information inside of Business Central to really drive that. So a lot of great capabilities here. Just want to kind of highlight that if you're on BC or if you're looking at BC, you can basically do the exact same thing that we do on the enterprise-based solution as well. Now, with that, obviously, there's one more that we want to go through because this isn't always the one that we talk through as part of it. Before we get to it, though, once again, I just want to wrap up just really quickly here. Like, we would typically use the BC-based perspective with it. If you're on BC, fantastic, you'd use it. If you're looking at the Business Central solution because it fits with all these different workloads, well, the Asset Guardian, for example, would be a good solution then to add into your environment so that you can then use that base capability. And we still do have first-party support then for fixed assets, but then if you think about it, you can actually go through and then implement this in different phases as well. And then finally, this is the argument I do here because there are some people that do believe this, and I do as well, to be honest. I see both lens of this. First party versus third party. Third-party apps typically have more features that they add quicker into an installation or an environment before first-party apps. So there can be an advantage then to using, obviously, those third-party apps as you go through that. The cool thing about this, though, is that it's natively integrated inside of Business Central for you, so it doesn't feel like a third-party app at all. Now, let's get into kind of the last part here. What about field service? So field service is not typically used to do maintenance, but it can be used, right? And that's what I want to open people's eyes to here, is because depending upon the need, this might be a better solution for you. So as an example with field service, you could set up a customer in field service. That's your internal customer, which is you, right? That's actually, your organization name, but you can also then do external field service as well, such as when you sell a product and install it, maybe you need to set up service, for example, that you need to tackle as part of that. Now, the cool thing about this is you can do a lot of those base capabilities from the other systems, such as asset tracking, understanding where it's located. You can set up different types of maintenance events, which we call service agreements, inside of the field service application. But the key thing to note here is that you don't then have as native of an integration with the financial perspective here, right? Or more advanced capabilities such as the purchasing. You can still generate purchase orders, but the financial impact or the three-way matching or the AP impact of it are not going to be covered then inside of field service. But it's still a valid solution. So let's take a look at the field service perspective so you can kind of understand a little bit more as to why we would even talk through field service, because as you can imagine, it can cover a lot. So I'm going to go ahead and just show real quick here. Oh, I forgot to flip it over. So there is our field service based area inside of here. So what are some of the cool things of this? Well, first off, it does have a lot of the same terminology that you would expect from a CMMS system. So you have work orders, you've got scheduling, you've got different types of accounts that you interact with, and finally you have assets and where those assets are installed inside of the system as well. As I open up my assets inside of here, what we should see then are the details of those given assets inside of Dynamics 365 here. So if I wanted to look at, for example, my Smart Brew, we've got coffee makers as assets inside of field service. Well, I can see where that's installed, for example, inside of that given functional location, which would be very similar then to the asset locations that we talked about with both F&O and BC. I can, for example, have sub-assets that are related to this, so parent and child that are related to this. I can have additional properties about that asset, such as different attributes that I then go ahead and maintain as part of this, so that I can also have readings that are for counters that are used as well inside of the system, right? Because maybe some of those given agreements then are based upon how many times a press has punched, for example, or how many miles an odometer has read as part of it. And the other aspect here that's really cool is the fact that these assets have a native integration as well with IoT-based capabilities from a field service perspective that you can kind of see here on the left-hand side as well. So the advantage here then when we start looking at field service is the fact that if you don't have an ERP app like Business Central or like Finance and Operations, you can get really close to setting up a lot of these different types of maintenance events that you may need by using what we call agreements inside of the solution. So just as a quick example here, in an agreement, on my booking setup that's related to it, what I can do is I can actually specify, for example, the recurrence of that particular booking so that basically we generate work orders then that in this example would be monthly work orders that would then be for preventative maintenance inside of the solution, right? And the nice thing about this is that when I look at these work orders as an example, we can really easily see or break out, for example, different types of work order types where we'll have, for example, preventative maintenance based work order types that may be different than break fix work types that we have inside of here. So you can have different types of views then as to what's preventative and what's break fix then inside of the environment very easily, as you can imagine. The other advantage here that we have then by using the field service based capabilities is that we have a really world-class scheduling board that allows you basically to go through and really align then the work needs then to the different maintenance technicians that you may have and the different skills and resources that you may need to use to be able to access that. So you can see here from a calendar perspective, being able to drag and drop a work order to say, yeah, you're going to work on this one to basically address some of those needs is a really nice feature, along with being able to, for example, if someone says that they're out, I may need to reschedule, for example, all of this work or move this work to a different type of resource very quickly and easily, right? So when you think about if you have a lot of scheduling issues with your maintenance technicians and you want a visual approach to really driving it, you don't need as much of the financial integration into obviously your maintenance perspective. Well, this would be a fantastic opportunity then to use really those base capabilities then inside of field service to drive some of those conversations. Now, kind of finally here, let's just wrap this up. So obviously we're a little bit over on time, so we're not going to be able to go through the Q&A, but please put the Q&A in and we'll absolutely follow up with email. But I just want to highlight who would really use then, for example, those capabilities. And really what we would look at here would be existing customers that are on the customer engagement apps like Dynamics 365 Sales, Marketing, or Customer Service. Or let's say you don't need the financial integration. Well, maybe this would be better for you because you can then just set up assets and maintain them and just create one account that's your internal account and then manage really spare parts and all those other perspectives and inside of Dynamics 365 Field Service to really drive that. And really the strengths here really are the fact that it is a first-party tracking of asset capability. It can actually then also be easily enabled if you already have some of these other CE apps. The scheduling board, like you saw, is fantastic. And it's designed, obviously, to support both internal and external customers. So if you do have maintenance that you're doing internally, and let's say you're selling those products as well, well, you can use basically the same system for your internal maintenance that you may be using for your external service as part of that. Finally, remember, we can do a combination of some of these, right, as well, where maybe you want the great scheduling board, for example, inside of CE, but you want to use BC. Well, we can work through more of a custom approach, really, to drive that as part of that process. All right, so let's wrap this up. How can we help you? So a couple of things I just want to highlight here, obviously. There are obviously multiple solutions that exist. We want to align that to your needs. What I really recommend for you to do is to reach out to us to ask more questions about this, because I can't generalize what every customer goes to when we look at these solutions. So talking to us would be a fantastic thing, because what we're going to do is we're going to really understand what you need for that good base so that you can align then the software needs to the actual business needs, right? Because we don't want to lead with software. We want to understand the business process need, and then from there, obviously, make those given recommendations. And remember, as we go through this, we go beyond then just some of the EAM or asset management perspective. We're here to really help you from development to what best practices you should use, along with the architecture and what ISVs you should use. Just remember that we are here beyond then as well with the asset management capabilities. And I personally would love to be able to hop on a demonstration and really show you really the full life cycle of how we then tackle these given products inside of the Microsoft stack.